Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Heather and Steve. Today our guest is Fayna Claire Pearlman. She's coming to us from Jersey, but she's a New York City girl, and she's going to talk with us about community. Steve, do you remember when you met Fayna or how you guys got connected?
Yeah, I'm not sure how long ago, but in my never-ending journey to try and find other passionate advocates in the IDD community, I reached on and found her on a Facebook post, and we started talking and Zooming and everything else, and find out we were on similar paths. So I thought it'd be great to have her on. She's inspiring, and it's kind of I think our audience likes to hear these kinds of stories and these kinds of conversations.
Absolutely. So, Fayna, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about you and how you started on this journey that you're on?
Thank you. I am so honored to be on this show and to talk to both of you, leaders in the space. And it's funny you're calling me inspiring, because I feel so absolutely inspired by all the incredible work you both do. A little bit about me and where I landed in community. I think ultimately, part of my beliefs in the world are about we all are here for a purpose. And we don't always get to know that purpose right away, but the more we can surrender and trust what's moving in us and where the external things are guiding us and the signpost, the more we can walk towards that. And so it wasn't as much of, hey, I knew this and I have to go there. It was more of a series of just lifetime experiences and continually finding myself in spaces, being able to recognize that all the dots exist. And for some reason, we're really bad at putting them together. And so containers for community, I guess, are what I really try to build and what I've been dedicating my life to. And, in the disability space especially, it's so incredible to see how much community is there. And I think very often when we're talking about community, it's so hard to find common ground. And I love the name of the podcast for that. And when we already have that, it takes so many barriers away. And, in this conversation, I just hope anyone listening can feel really empowered and recognize that everything that they've ever thought they needed from outside of themselves or wanted to build and don't feel like that they can, that everything already exists inside of us. And sometimes it may just take a mirror or another person or the right connection to bring that out in us.
I love that. Something you said flashed me back. I was in a classroom many moons ago. This is a very long time ago, probably almost 20 years ago. And I was working with a teacher who wasn't really familiar with autism, but he was trying. And we were at the part of our journey with autism, I think, as an educational community that we did not call it this. We did not realize we were doing it, but we were teaching people to mask their autism, kind of hide it so they didn't look so different and awkward. And although I always have valued the person for who they are, this teacher was really struggling with walking down the hallway with a classroom full of people that were extremely awkward at points, right? Like they really needed the social skills training and to be immersed and have that support. And there was this young man, and I can't remember what he was doing exactly, but the teacher said, "Do you know how weird that makes you look?" And the whole class got really silent. And the young man looked up and he said, "I'm painfully aware of how different I am." And it has always stuck with me because even though he was in a room full of people with the same diagnosis and some similar challenges, he felt so different and so alone. But that was the spark for me to start talking about the things that they shared, the symmetries in their lives, the way their paths crossed, even if they seem like radically different human beings, right? And for the first time, some of these people in that class formed relationships that were reciprocal. If someone didn't show up for school, they were worried, where's so-and-so? And they would text them or call them, or we'd send them an email. And it was such a beautiful thing to see that little tiny micro community in a classroom start to blossom for people who felt so really on the outside, even when they were in their own classroom. So I don't know exactly what you said, but I had that moment like flash back to me, and I just thought the community is incredibly important. And there's not just, the town that you live in or the street that you're in or your neighborhood. Community can mean so many things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what community means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a heart-wrenching story. And I have so many questions about how you started the conversations and what that conversation was that allowed folks to feel closer together. And the question that keeps coming up for me is, what does it actually mean to belong? Right? What is it, like you said, what does it really mean to be a part of a community? And I think the only way, at least it's probably very individual. For me, the only way to do that is a level of self-honesty first, to be able to then bring that into relationship, and being not afraid to ask for what we need, to know our needs. And I think this whole idea of, ask for what you need, self-care and all of that stuff, we don't really kind of know most of the time. Like there's a whole journey of self-discovery that needs to happen first to explore that, especially if we are givers or, codependents or, people who are so focused on taking care of others and giving to others, or who have this tolerance to be more focused on everyone else because, at least for myself, like I'm really adaptable. My needs always feel less of a priority than the people's around me because I'm good. Give me a blanket and a pillow on the floor and I'll be fine, And I think that journey and that self-honesty, that radical self-honesty is the first step. And then we bring that to bear. And we are living in a world right now where having difficult conversations is really hard, right? We have these echo chambers where we're afraid to give honest feedback to each other. And the more that kind of builds and bottlenecks, I think the more we really need it. And mostly for me, it's just been kind of a leap of faith. And seeing that when I do start to express or do start to have those difficult conversations, it just works. And we kind of have to trust that. I have a childhood best friend. We've been friends since the 6th grade. So it's been a couple of decades already. And we've had a bit of a rough patch this last year and have had some distance between us. It wasn't any one thing in particular. It was just, kind of veering. We've been in different places. It's been hard to kind of resonate on the same frequency. And he took his space and I really wanted to connect. And I reached out a few times. We finally did actually get to sit down. And on my way to go meet up with him, I was like, I had all this fear. And I was so nervous. I was like, what if I don't like him anymore? Like, what if I realize I don't know if we actually do want to be friends or I do want to keep investing in this connection? And I was so nervous about it. And so we started talking maybe 10, 15 minutes in. I was like, what am I talking about? This person is so beautiful. And it all just it just worked, right? All the things and the fear that I had leading up to it, really so much of that was in our head. And a lot of this work is like coming back to our bodies. And I think especially when there's so much stimulation to our heads all the time, or when it often feels like we're almost at odds with what's moving through our mind, or it's moving so quickly, there's always this peaceful space we can come to in our bodies in a different way. And, everyone's relationship to that is really different. I have some childhood trauma that made relating to my body very, very difficult growing up. And it's taken a lot of work to step out of that kind of dissociation, that, dare even say disgust at my own self and all of that. And I've come to recognize time and time again that my body has led me everywhere I was meant to go, whether that was, rejecting sources of distraction, right? For me, it showed up with, maybe doing drugs and my body was like, no more. Maybe it shows up with when you're with someone, you realize you're kind of shrinking a little bit. And it gives us these clues to let us know what we really feel. And if we can start to kind of come back into that and relate to ourselves differently, it transforms the way we can relate to other people. And then we can start to look for connection. We can start to trust. And we all have our different stories and the woundings and everything. But I think a big step too is finding people, that we can look up to, mentorship, guides, teachers. We used to have our village elders. Now we pay for therapists. That's great. Good. Do it, but making sure that we have these kind of relationships and guides that can not tell us what to do, but can remind us that we have what we need inside already and that we know what to do if we can listen to that.
Yes. When we started this podcast and we would talk to potential guests and we'd say, we really like to bring different perspectives on, not to argue, but to be in the same space because they each perspective holds part of the solution, right? And if you only preach to the choir and you only talk to the people who are like-minded, then you can never move the needle. You really actually have to convert the people who are in the way, right? Maybe not even convert, but maybe just meet in the middle where you're like, well, I understand now why you feel that way. And so we thought, this is such a great concept. This isn't being adversarial or negative. This is really just sitting at the table together to work things out. And the first few people we talked to, they were like, no, I don't want to do that. And they were people that I really highly respect and that I think they're so brave and they're empowered. And it made me think we, as people, are so worried about being dismissed or disrespected or undervalued that, like you were saying, it's almost really hard to sit at the table with someone who's going to disagree or have a different opinion because you feel like in some ways it makes your opinion less valuable or unheard, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. I love talking to people with different views, and I learned so much. I mean, I tell this story all the time, but I grew up with hippies. I mean, my parents were really definitely more of a Democratic persuasion. And I married a Marine who's a Republican. And it's just completely different thought processes on different things. He's gone to war. He's been in Iraq. My parents knew about Vietnam. The ways they see it are so different. We'll bring them in the same room and we can have dinner together and we can celebrate Christmas together. And then I think the world needs that. Whatever we're doing and however we figured that out, where you can share space with people with different views. Because a community is never just one perspective, right?
Fayna, and Heather and I are walk the talk. We're both going to a disability gala tomorrow night. And it's interesting because we have multiple politicians coming from both sides of the aisle in the same room. We have people that have in the IDD community, whether they're advocates, parents, self-advocates, individuals, but also people in the community who've never been exposed to an autistic child or a teen or adult. And they're all coming in the room. We're going to see them all in the same room. And like you're talking about community, there's no better place than to do this and get them all there in the same place and have the opportunity to try and learn and teach from each other. And we're really excited about doing it. And it's kind of and one of the reasons why we want to do it all over the state is we're hoping these little projects that we do, that other people in your area do it, and people in Rochester do it, and we're all from all different parts of the state, and so we're hoping that we can empower everybody for that community that you're looking for too.
Because the problems can feel so big, especially when you're facing them, just sitting in your house under your roof by yourself. One quick example is I'm so concerned about home care in New York State. The program is really getting overhauled right now, and it's in disarray. It's very scary to see how it's playing out. And so I'm online a lot, and I'm doing press conferences and speeches and writing op-eds. And this woman that has been in this small group with us, me and Steve, for a long time, started reaching out to me. First, it was just a text message or, something online. Now she's calling me daily. And it's because we are sharing an experience. But she lives in Long Island, and I live in Rochester. But we would never know. We feel so connected, and we've never seen each other in person. And so even though I value in person so much, I love being able to give someone a hug and really read them, have them in the room with me. we do have options with the way the world is and the technology that we have today.
Absolutely. And I got chills so many times as you both were talking about this, reaching across the aisle and being willing to connect, because we don't really, community becomes limited if we're not expanding. And I think the only way to expand is to kind of have that challenged in us. And, your story, Heather, reminded me of this concept that we're working on to integrate it into one of the projects I'm doing, which is a residential facility, mental health and trauma and addiction on a full-scale organic farm. And one of those ideas is this difference between safety and security. Right? There's this concept of safety, right? We talk about that a lot. It's such a buzzword now of like, I need to feel safe. I need to feel safe. And there's this idea of safety is about an external form of it, right? It's like, okay, I have a roof over my head. Okay, I have enough money to put food on my table. I have these basic needs met. And security, kind of to put a spin on all of this, is similar, but from an internal space where even if I don't have a roof over my head, I know I'll be okay. I'll know I'll figure it out. And I think when we're always just trying to push away different opinions and different ideas, it's ultimately this almost endless striving towards safety instead of security. And if we are moving towards that inner sense of security, of knowing that we can be okay, that whatever comes to us, we can handle, and that resilience, and building that resilience in ourselves, then whoever's in front of us, whatever the issue at hand is, we're going to just be able to come at it, I think, with more openness to do it together. And another aspect to this too, and kind of like, how do we even start, right? Because what we're talking about, when we talk about the world, it's so big. And when we talk about ourselves, like it almost feels like totally divided. It's like, how do I as an individual find my place in such a big, crazy, and, many would argue such difficult and painful space? And I think that actual bridge is community, right? It kind of takes that big world and creates a little microcosm through which we can find that sense of belonging. We can find a place where we feel like our lives are meaningful, right? To borrow from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, that's what we need. We need a sense of meaning, and I see it in the mental health space all of the time. And it's, in a world, in a capitalist society where meaning has become equated to like a fiscal value, that becomes really difficult. But in community, when we can see like you and this woman connecting, when you can see how you two have connected, what meaning and what depth and what joy and all of the beauty that comes with that, it gives us a greater reason to wake up every day. We know that there's things outside of ourselves that are great and that we're needed.
Yeah. And even if I can't solve my problem, I might be able to solve hers. It's funny how sometimes when you have that step back in that slightly different perspective, you can really care about the person and, feel like you walk in their shoes. But when you don't actually live their life, some things are just more clear because we don't have as much of the emotional part kind of fogging the way we see it. There's another thing that popped into my brain too when you were talking about feeling like belonging and having a meaning in life. My daughter, Devin, is non-speaking. So she has a rare genetic disorder, and it makes it so everything motor-based is really difficult. Moving her eyes, pushing air out to form words, just almost nearly impossible. Walking, coordinated movements, things like that. So for the longest time, we knew she was smart. We knew she had ideas. She was very definite about things, but she didn't have a way to truly tell us, right? So we were always guessing. We were guessing she liked the color purple. We were guessing she liked Curious George because it was always on our iPad. We were guessing, and we thought we were right. Well, over the last couple of years, she's been learning how to spell and communicate through text, like text-based communication. And oh my gosh, we guessed a lot of things accurately and a lot of things weren't. But the mental health piece is so big for this population. You think about autism. Oh, there's so many people with autism. But then you think about how many people have complex behaviors or complex medical needs on top of that autism. And the world starts shrinking, right? And even though there's a lot of people with autism at Devon's school, no one's like her. And so, like, some of the things that she has said, they just shake me, because she is desperately trying to stay connected to the people in her classroom because they're all she's known. But academically, she's very different from them, right? Like, she has these different ideas and thoughts and wants to go to history class and learn how to do calculus and all these things. And at first she was sad for them that they didn't want that. You know, she was assuming that everybody would want to excel in those ways. And then she started advocating, and we started getting her in some of the classrooms with some typical peers learning age level material. And she felt like she wasn't supposed to be there. Like, she didn't actually fit. Like, she thought it would be this magic moment where everybody was like, oh, Devon's here, and she's so smart, and she's supposed to be here. And she didn't think it was going to have friction, or the people would look at her and not understand her. Any chance you saw the movie on Disney Plus? It's called Out of My Mind. Mm-hmm. Oh, you got to watch it.
Definitely going to now.
It is definitely good. How about you, Steve? Have you seen it?
Nope, it's on my list now too.
It is such a good movie. I'm emotionally involved in it because the first book me and Devon really, really read together was this book. I mean, we've read her entire life, but she's never been engaged with it. This one, she was totally focused in on. It's about a young woman who has cerebral palsy and is non-speaking. And everybody in her classroom is learning shapes and colors and, you know, what sounds the animals make forever. Like, and she's not even in the school. She's in this trailer on the side of the school, and she's longing to be part of that community, like beyond her trailer, in the school. She wants it so bad. And the whole movie, you see, like, her advancements. She communicates that she wants a communication device. She gets one, you know, like all these things. She gets into the classrooms. She gets to start mainstreaming. But it's really emotional because even though the people can see how smart she is, when she's trying to eat her food and her motor is bad and the food's going down her face, they're still laughing. They're still teasing her. They're still saying that's gross, or they don't want to sit with her at lunch. And I don't know how we help people just be brave and keep doing it. You know, I've known people in my life that, they make a mess when they eat, right? I have a lot of friends that make a mess when they eat. And for some reason, at some point, they just got confident enough just to be themselves wherever they were, and they own it. And something about when you own it, then everybody else, it's a little easier to accept it. You know, you're not embarrassed, maybe. I don't know if you have any views on that, but that movie is a must-see.
Yeah. Wow. Definitely going to watch it. And I think you're touching on that internal security, and, you know, a big part of the clinical model we're working on too. And, you know, this is definitely going to be a bit disruptive in the mental health space. And I think can really relate in the disability space too, is we live in a world and we're swimming in a river that is constantly defining our path based off of these diagnoses, based off of these things that we're calling illness and disorder and disease, and even the word disability. I know I've said it, but, like, you know, all of these words, they impact us, these ideas, these things, because we're trying to make sense of ourselves. And here you go, open up a book, read the DSM-5 criteria, suddenly you understand yourself, and it becomes really reductionistic and limiting of everything that we are. And a big part of our model is about kind of flipping this disease model on its head, where actually all of these ways you're showing up, they're not depression, anxiety, they're not just symptoms of autism. Like, these are all coping mechanisms that you've learned to do your best with. And it does not fit into this fake standard that we have in society today that actually makes no sense if we try to break that down. And B, it's done everything you've needed needed it to do thus far, and now it's not. Now it's been hard. It's not allowing you to keep going. And so it's really just about kind of learning these new skills. And I think, like you said, that first skill is an internal security of letting that shame go. And I think talking about it, saying where we're ashamed, and exploring that is a huge step. But also, and I totally acknowledge, especially for our younger listeners, that's really hard. Kids, high school, like, that is not a space that welcomes difference. And we live in a world that tries to conform us. And, eventually, and I think many of us get there, and especially, those of us who did have to go through some kind of difference. We probably get there a little earlier as we start to mature in life, is we start to own that, because we have to, right? I have a new mentor and dear friend who was born with a physical disability, and they are a serial entrepreneur. They're like opened up so many companies. They have done such amazing work, and it's just been beautiful to see. And actually, I think when we do kind of struggle with this extra kind of hoop to go through, it shows us that we're actually so much stronger than the average person who seems like the normal person, right? Mm-hmm. And there's also just no sense of normal, I don't think there is. And there are very few people that I think I've ever met in my life who, if they went to a psychiatrist, wouldn't come out with something, or if they went to the doctor, wouldn't be told something. And, we're seeing it on social media. Everyone's diagnosing themselves and all of these things. And I think it's almost a misplaced sense of just wanting to know ourselves and struggling to find that sense of belonging and that community. And, we have to find that in ourselves. That's why there's a theory in mental health. It's called internal family systems. And the whole concept is that we are made up of a lot of parts. And I've been thinking about it in terms of, it's almost become the replacement for community and a way of thinking about ourselves. Like, we have our inner child, we have our inner teen, we have our inner wise person. We have this whole cast of characters that are all the different voices in us. And a huge part of that therapeutic journey is actually starting to get to know those parts, right? We talk about this also in terms of shadow work, and just getting to know and actually characterizing them, I've named a lot of my parts, and it allows me to interact with them in a different way. And the theory is kind of based on, there are no bad parts. Every single aspect of us that sometimes drives the car, even when we don't want it. I know when my inner teen is coming out because my eyeliner will be really heavy, and it'll usually align with kind of difficulty with authority. I'll be like, uh-oh, she's out, and I'm totally blended, and she's totally driving this car right now, and let's sit down and talk, and let self come back in and lead this, community in the way that it's meant to. And we all have that. And when we start to nurture those leadership capabilities in our own internal world, we can start to nurture that externally too, and surprise ourselves. We're capable of so much more than we know.
Fayna, I know you mentioned sense of belonging. Heather knows I do therapeutic foster care, and we've done it for a long time. I think I've told you too.
Yeah,
and
amazing.
You know what? I go to meetings with these kids that come into our home, whether they're 5 years old or 20 years old, and they want to throw clinical at them. They want to throw meds at them. They want to throw more meds at them. They want to throw all these things that they think are supports. You know what these kids want? Exactly what you said, a sense of belonging. They want to know that we have their back when they come to our house, and we don't care about their past, because I don't even look at that stuff. When we do an intake, I don't even look at it. They want us to look at all this piles of stuff. All their past, I could care less. I only care what they do in my house. But they want a sense of belonging. They want a sense of community. And like I said, they want to know that we have their back in this stuff. And that's when we start seeing improvements. It's not more meds, and it's not more all the other stuff.
It's that unconditional piece, right? That I take you as you are. And if you want to be something different, I'll walk with you as you reach that destination. And we can take all these twists and turns along the way, right? That's so important. That's floor time. That's DIR. That's my training as a psychologist. It's all about relationships. And once somebody knows that you think it's really cool to lay on the ground and see the light flick through the trees too, there'll be somebody, and we'll call it stimming. We'll have a clinical term. Oh, he's stimming. And I'm like, he is enjoying the light coming through the leaves on the tree, and I'm going to try it too. And I'll lay just like he is on the ground, and he looks at me, and you can tell in that moment, he's like, yeah, you get it. You valued me. You're meeting me where I'm at. And then that's how Steve does it. I've watched him. Like, he just connects with people without, he doesn't know maybe the psychological term or the treatment term for it, but he's doing it naturally. It's just who you are, Steve.
That incredible ability to be so radically present in a given moment. And that's hard. And the old cliche, we're not human doings, we're human beings. It's so true. And just taking a moment to take a breath and just be with the people here. I was nervous about coming on the show. My armpits are all sweaty. I was like, oh gosh, what if I speak silly and all of this stuff? And took a deep breath and I'm like, there's two beautiful humans here in front of me, and let's just connect. What comes up naturally is okay. And I think that's ultimately the narrative that we've somehow forgotten, that these qualities about us, these attributes, these emotions, we struggle being okay with just our natural emotions that come up, and when we recognize that we need to remember what it means to be human. And what it means to be human is not to be a cog in the machine of our current systems and our current paradigms, but, to cry with joy as the light filters through the trees, to be amazed by that. There's nothing, it's crazy to think that that's something we can label or pathologize, that is just, to me, what it really means to be alive. I think it's why probably all of us here love animals. They're so good at that. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of equine therapy work, and horses are incredible. Horses are prey, they're not predators. And so their primary concern is a sense of safety. They have internal security. They'll kick you if you don't feel safe to them, but their primary concern in interacting is safety. And I've seen incredible things happen with people working with horses, because let's say I go up to a horse and I'm terrified, but I don't show that. I go up to the horse, I'm like, oh, hi, horsey, I'm not afraid of you. That horse is going to walk to the other side of the arena. That horse is going to be like, whoa, something about you does not feel right. This does not feel safe. Your insides do not match your outsides. And so that level of kind of having to resonate those two and become emotionally congruent, where we let our outside match our inside, where what we're expressing is actually true to what we're experiencing, that I've seen just in a second, horses will come walk right over to you and nuzzle you. They'll put their head on your shoulder. They'll let you pet them. They'll be willing to connect. And we need that, because with our sympathetic nervous system, right? When that is active, we're in a fight or flight. We're actually not quite capable biologically to connect and socially engage with one another. And so that, like the horse breath, which we do a lot, like the it actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which puts us in a space where we can actually connect. And that's why horses do it. Sometimes I'll be super stressed. I'll go to a horse. It'll take me 45 minutes to get honest with myself and then the horse about what I'm feeling. And they'll do this big out sigh. My dog, when he sighs, I'm like, oh, thank you. Right? Like, come back to this.
Model it for me. No, yeah. It's funny. I'm going to be a little vulnerable. I think our audience knows some of my story, but I was in an abusive marriage, and I had 2 little children, and they both had challenges that we were trying to figure out, right? But, well, I guess I was trying to figure it out, and I was trying to make it better, and it was a very difficult time in my life. And when my ex-husband finally exploded and broke a bunch of things, and we changed the locks, and he wasn't going to come back, I was not me, not the person I am today. I was very broken and scared. And even though he made me nervous, I thought he made me safe. And I don't know how to explain it any other way. But then my one daughter was having these horrible seizures, and they just couldn't figure out what to do. And I was at a sleep clinic, and they said, you should get her a service dog, because then, you're a single mom and the dog can come alert you if she's having a seizure. So literally it became a solution that sounded so great. But you were talking about animals. This dog, I feel like saved me just as much as it saved Devin, because to be a dog handler and to show the dog how to serve Devin, I had to be the alpha. I had to show the dog exactly what was needed. And when I was not confident, when I was not in control of my insides, when I was freaking out, the dog would take over. She was this big Bouvier sheepdog, and she'd be like, "You don't have your stuff together right now. I'm taking over." And she did okay, but it taught me to be calm, cool, and collected. That's like my kids still use that phrase because I'd have to like say it to myself, center myself. But that dog gave me that. Like we could walk into a room full of people, and I knew I had to keep myself centered for the dog and Devin because it went through the leash. That's what the trainer would say. Like all your feelings go right through the leash into the dog. They can read you so fast. So that dog made such a difference for Devin because people didn't care that she couldn't talk anymore. They didn't care that she had a chewy in her mouth or she was jingling chains in her hand because she had this big, fluffy white dog with her. And Hannah was so social and sweet that all the kids that used to ignore her then would come up to her. You know, when we were at the grocery store, it wasn't people pointing like, "What's wrong with that girl?" It was, "Oh, there's a dog." You know, like, so we just became the girl with the dog. And I asked Devin about it now because was it good or bad? I mean, it felt incredibly important to all of us. And she said that that was the moment she knew she was going to be okay. That I had connected her to this animal that could help her like join the world, like quite literally by a tether, holding onto this dog, learning how to walk for more than 5 feet and being part of a classroom without eloping. And people will say all the time, "Nobody else had a service dog. What made you do that?" And I had a fight. It was not easily accepted by a lot of people, but it was magic. Like when you were talking about the horses, there was nothing that was better for her or for me and for my other daughter at that time. We needed Hannah just as much as Devin.
How do we do that? How do we embody, Hannah? How do we embody these creatures and what are they? Why is it so safe for us to come up to someone that has a dog, but not just come up to someone and say hello?
Mm-hmm. And we know they're not going to talk back. It's funny because Devin has said recently, people say things to her that are internal thoughts because she can't speak verbally back to them. It's almost the same kind of concept, right? But now we know she's totally processing it. She's really listening to us. But she has this like gift, right? Like that people just pour their souls out to her. And until now, she couldn't respond. So that had to be hard. She could have had ideas on how to help them, but it's...
Not the whole.
Yeah. So this conversation's great. I love all the twists and turns. Are there any things that we haven't touched on? I would love for you to talk actually more about your farm and that model. I love intentional planned communities, and I just would love to hear more about it. I'm sure our audience would too. Where it's located, things like that.
But we haven't actually purchased. It's not launched yet. We're in the process of getting it ready. I will definitely update you guys when we have the location. We're looking for properties now, and it's an intentional community. I think switching away from the disease model, switching away from this. Most of these places you go there, you're given a schedule, you're told exactly everything wrong with you, what you need, here you go. And one of the greatest aspects of what we're doing is every individual that comes becomes an active participant in what they need. And instead of telling you what you need, you come and you work with guides, with, calling it concierge or with therapists or mentors to say, hey, what's going on? And then there'll be people that can say, I've noticed you've been avoiding these types of groups and classes for the last 3 weeks. Do you want to talk about that? What's going on there? And just to act, I always think of like a fun house of mirrors where like so often we walk in the world and all these people we meet, some of these mirrors are completely distorted, right? You look really skinny, you look really fat, you have all these like weird things that happen. And then there's some mirrors where you look in and you're like, wow, this feels like me, like this is what I look like. It's so clear. And I think true community can act as that container. And it's not foolproof. It's the idea that we can have really intense conflict and we're still going to be here to repair. And that takes a lot of practice. And most of us don't know how to do that. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first time in my life I've even discovered what the term reciprocal repair means, that I can work through something with someone and my needs matter too. And I think especially for all our listeners who are caregivers, who are constantly, sacrificing of themselves, and who love other people so unconditionally and so well and so easily, and who struggle to do that for themselves, is really coming back to prioritize that in ourselves of, my needs do matter. And there is a way to have reciprocal repair where you don't always just have to meet the person where they're at, where you can express what it is that's moving through you too. And I think when we actually come into that, for me, it was really emotional. I went through this in a really intense way with my family. I'll be vulnerable as well. You shared so rawly. I was sexually abused as a child growing up for many years. And it wasn't until this year that I actually told my whole family about it. And it's been really intense. It was another person in my life that the family all knew, and it was really difficult because there were multiple layers of relationships to both of us, so it wasn't so clear cut. And I realized in that it completely shifted the way I've always related to everyone in my family. I'd always been the mediator in my family, the peacekeeper. I'd always been the one that kind of I called myself the translator. When there'd be conflict between different members of my family, I'd call both and say, no, this is what they really meant to say, and when terrible things were said to me, I always understood what was underneath it. And I had so much space and allowance for that, so much tolerance for that. And I realized in taking that huge leap and kind of taking that family secret out from under the rug and leading with transparency, as hard as it has been, and it's taken this entire year, finally coming to a place of relating in a new way. And I think what's so hard is when we make these active changes for ourselves, when we choose ourselves and we choose what feels right for us, it's not usually received right away that well. People are so to you in a certain way that they might become resentful or angry, or like, hey, I thought I knew you. We try to box people into what we know. And so breaking out of that can seem really scary. And when we can really stick to that, people eventually get used to it. And speaking of dog training, I've been learning how to do that for my dog as well. And it was so fascinating learning about classical conditioning. I realized we condition each other all the time. You call up that friend where every time something happens, you call them and they're like, yeah, screw that other person. You're totally in the right. They're conditioning us to call them every time something comes up. And it's what if we can be a little bit more intentional in how we do that? Because we're doing it anyway, right? So, and I remember when I first discovered this, I wanted to test it. So, every time my partner went into the dishes, I would just walk over and squeeze their shoulder. Just a little squeeze. And I noticed after a week, when they would do the dishes, I'd see them turn, where's my shoulder squeeze? Whoa, it's too much work to even try to think to do that intentionally all the time. And also that would probably just be quite manipulative. But when we can start to recognize how we're conditioning ourselves and our relationships, we can just bring so much more honesty to them, I think, and just recognize hey, no, you know what? I'm tired of always being the one having to do this, but I've trained everyone to think that I'm the one that goes and does this, Yeah. And so just starting to build that awareness for ourselves and those behaviors, I think, is a huge first step. And I totally went on a tangent of what the farm, the intentional community is. But yeah, ultimately it's about creating a community around this. There's 3 layers of classes, and it's kind of what we're talking about. We're calling them rings. So the outer ring of groups is about the world and how we relate to the world. The center ring is how we relate to community. And we're going to learn a lot of skills of interrelatedness, interdependence, talking to each other, communication skills, understanding how certain experiences in our life thus far have informed the way we talk and connect with people, or don't, or disconnect. And then the inner ring is where we'll kind of go into much more deep, maybe trauma work and, EMDR and all these things that are a little bit more deep. But yeah, I think in general, that it's that center ring that I think we all need more of. And how can we all go out into the world and build containers for that community to exist? Because we all know we need it. We all want it. It's but just how do we do that?
Right.
Where do we...
And it's such honesty that you have to have with yourself and others. Because I might know who I am inside and really be okay with it, but then being that person in front of someone, it takes of bravery, but like just being honest. Like I want to be congruent. I want what I'm feeling to be what I'm expressing. I cannot stand when I'm really, really angry and I start crying, because then I look like I'm sad to the person or I'm weak, when really I'm just so emotional because I'm about to tell them how angry I am and I don't want them to be upset. Like I'm so worried about their reaction to my emotion that I make myself look smaller. I don't give myself the credit that I deserve in that moment. And that's one of the things I've worked on for years.
Yeah. Yeah. And the freedom to feel both. Maybe in those moments you are angry and you are sad, and those can exist together.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to bring up, because I would love your opinion on this, just knowing who you are. And then I don't know if Steve has a closing question, but when you were talking about all your different sides of you, right? Like the younger version of you, that resonated with me a lot. But it made me think of my daughter with autism, Lillian. We started the podcast, and I'm like, we really need to get YouTube subscribers. You know, people in my age group might love the podcast, but they never hit subscribe. So like, I don't know how to get them to to do this. How do we get them to click the button? It's free. You know, like, how do you get them to do it? And she was so cute, because she's like, well, I have 14 YouTube accounts and I'll subscribe with all of them. And so I said, Lillian, why do you have 14 YouTube accounts? She's like, well, each of them is a different personality. Like when I want to be angry and really, mouthy, I'm Lila. When I want to be the calm, therapeutic friend, I'm Cora. Like, she had like all different names for these YouTube accounts. And I was like, for a second, I'm like, oh, geez, I don't know if that's healthy. She's...
That's amazing. And how
but at the same time, great, right? Like she really, it's like fine tune this, but I don't know where we should go from here. So I'm just looking for a little advice,
I think you can ask her about, how do these different YouTube channels feel about each other? How does Lila?
That's a good one.
And you'll kind of get to see and work with her about where there might be, I don't know, some internal parts battling each other. Because ideally we want harmony with ourselves, right? We want all of these parts of the concept is called integrated. We want to integrate all of these parts and then lead with self. So I always picture like a big table. Whenever all of my parts are sitting around the table and I'm at the head of the table. The other parts really, if the other parts are at the head of the table, I'm already blended. I'm not really integrated. I'm like, self is nowhere to be seen. And, sometimes we can have certain parts that masquerade as self. I've experienced that of like, oh yeah, that's me. But it's like, no, that's actually the me with all the amazing defense mechanisms who survived this long in this way, but yeah, I think that's incredible that she does that. It's so beautiful. And yeah, I would start to just get curious about it. See how she feels about each of them. Maybe there's these YouTube channels that she actually doesn't like to go back and watch or listen to, or actually feels really weird about. And just start for that. But it feels like such a natural way for her to process that inner world. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that parents sometimes get caught up in it. They're like, that's really weird. I'll go back to, we'll go back to where we started to finish the show. Like that teacher, do you know how weird that makes you look? Like if we respond to our children or the people that we're serving or supporting with that perspective, that makes you so strange, or that makes you stand out. Instead of like, what does that do for you? Like, what function does it serve for you? How does that help? How does it hurt you? Because I have a lot of conversations with people that I advocate for, saying, okay, when we walk into this meeting, we're not going to do what we did last time. That didn't work. Even though we might feel like that's what we should do in that moment, we're going to take a deep breath. We'll have a signal for each other, but that's community. Like you said, they're not going in there alone, and they're going in there with a plan. And knowing that you can have those emotions and feelings in front of somebody, that's really sticking out to me today after this conversation, because in the moments that I'm vulnerable and I've opened up and I've let people know how hard things actually are, is when the needle moves. When I try to make it sound like I have things under control, and probably the people I'm talking to know I'm full of it, in that moment they're like, she does not have this under control. But I'm acting like I do. They're much less likely to help me in that moment than if I'm honest and I have a tear roll down my cheek, or I tell them that I'm nervous about what will happen when I'm not here. Because having 4 kids with different disabilities, my goodness, what will happen when I'm not here? And then that resonates with people. Then that moves them in a different way.
Yeah, Fayna, look, I don't really have a question. It's more of a comment. I mentioned in the beginning that one of the reasons when I reached out to you and after conversations that, boy, she's inspiring. There's a reason, because you're real, you're authentic, and you have a passion for making this world better. Using those 3 rings is a good start. And I think I don't even think, I know you're going to do great things, and I wish you well. And we'd love to have you back. I know we were going to have another guest with you, and we'd love to have him back too. So down the road, I think we can plan on something else, and also maybe look at some collaboration somewhere down the road.
Yeah,
I love it. Yay.
We see in others what we find familiar within ourselves, Steve.
So thank you so much for coming today. And we will, in the podcast description, we'll have links to things if you have, things you want to point people towards, and more information about the show and how you can support the podcast. We're, a grassroots initiative, and we're going to have an online merch store soon. So that's like our exciting announcement. I'm very excited. But that's also where everything will live. We'll have the links to the podcast platforms and our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, so that we have like a one-stop shop for people to come and find all the stuff that we've been doing and ways you can connect with us. So until next time, thanks for joining us.
Continue the conversation by joining our Facebook group. If you're a fan of the show, please join our supporters club. Subscribe on YouTube, rate and review on your favorite listening app, but most of all, share it with your friends. Just one more click or comment can make a huge difference and help us to continue finding common ground.